A crew of Sicilian immigrants running pizza parlors moved an estimated $1.65 billion in heroin through the United States, and the FBI couldn't get a single informant inside the operation. Not one. The Bureau's most successful undercover agent in history spent 6 years embedded in the same crime family. He never got close to the Sicilians. They spoke a dialect no agent understood, operated on blood ties rooted in villages most Americans couldn't find on a map, and used vocal inflection itself as a code layer that made literal translation meaningless. The FBI didn't even have a Sicilian-speaking agent assigned to the case. They had to pull a former housewife from the closed files section to translate wiretaps. The crew was called the Zips, a slang term the American-born Mafia used behind their backs, part insult and part fear. They numbered roughly 24 men. They operated inside the Bonanno crime family, but answered to bosses in Palermo. Between 1975 and 1984, they built a transcontinental heroin pipeline that ran from Turkish poppy fields through Sicilian refineries to pizza parlors in Brooklyn, New Jersey, Michigan, Florida, and a town of 3,500 people in rural Illinois. The pipeline generated more drug revenue than any single American Mafia family produced from all its operations combined. The trial that eventually dismantled it lasted 17 months, cost $50 million, and remains the longest federal criminal jury trial in American history. 3 of the defendants didn't survive to hear the verdict. This is the story of a criminal organization that was structurally invisible to the most powerful law enforcement apparatus in the world, not because the FBI wasn't looking, but because everything the Bureau knew about investigating the Mafia was built for a different kind of criminal. The Zips broke the model. Most people who know the phrase pizza connection think of a drug case, a trial, a set of convictions. That's the surface. Underneath it is something the mainstream account has never adequately explained: how a parallel organization existed inside the Bonanno family for over a decade, operating on rules the American Mafia didn't follow, speaking a language the FBI couldn't decode, and generating profits that dwarfed anything the 5 families had ever seen from narcotics. The correction isn't that the Zips dealt drugs. Everyone who's read a paragraph about the Bonannos knows that. The correction is that the Zips represented a fundamentally different model of organized crime, one the American system of investigation was structurally incapable of detecting until the damage was already measured in billions. The foundation was laid 20 years before the first pizza parlor opened. In October of 1957, Joseph Bonanno chaired a 4-day summit at the Grand Hotel et de Palme in Palermo, Sicily. The attendee list reads like a transatlantic who's who of organized crime. Carmine Galante attended as consigliere. Lucky Luciano, exiled from the United States since 1946, was present. The Sicilian delegation was led by Giuseppe Janco Russo. The agreement reached at that meeting was specific and consequential. Too many American mobsters were going to prison on narcotics charges, drawing federal heat to the families and undermining their grip on labor unions, construction, and legitimate enterprise. The solution was division of labor. The Sicilians would handle drug trafficking in the United States directly, using their own men, their own supply routes, their own money channels. American families would provide territorial access, distribution infrastructure, and protection. Sicilian clans would provide product, personnel, and, above all, silence. Galante was the hinge. Born February 21, 1910, in a tenement on East 104th Street in East Harlem, to parents from Castellamare del Golfo, he looked nothing like what he was. Balding, bespectacled, 5'4", he resembled a retired grandfather selecting vegetables at a Greenwich Village market. Prison psychiatrists at Sing Sing had evaluated him in 1931 as a psychopathic personality with an IQ of 90 and a mental age of 14 and a half. Yet associates said he quoted St. Augustine and Plato in casual conversation. NYPD Lieutenant Remo Franceschini said that not since the days of Vito Genovese had there been a more ruthless and feared individual. The rest of them are copper. He's pure steel. Galante had spent time in Italy during the 1950s, building relationships with Sicilian clan leaders across the Trapani and Palermo provinces. After serving a 12-year federal narcotics sentence, he was paroled in 1974 and immediately accelerated the importation program. A young man arrived from Castellammare del Golfo, his ancestral town, and the hometown of Cesare Bonventre and Baldassare Amato. They arrived from Chimina in Palermo province, Salvatore Catalano's hometown, a hilltop village where his brother Onofrio ran the local mafia clan. They arrived from Cinisi, Gaetano Badalamenti's base, just minutes from Palermo's airport. They entered with no American criminal records, making them invisible to every law enforcement database in the country. Galante placed them in pizza parlors across the Northeast and Midwest, Brooklyn, Queens, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Michigan, Florida, and towns most people have never heard of. The same route that moved young men from Castellammare to Knickerbocker Avenue would soon move something far more profitable. And we'll get to exactly how the pizza parlors made it work. The cultural wall between the Zips and the American-born Bonanno members ran deeper than language. It was behavioral, moral, and operational. Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero, the aging soldier who unknowingly befriended undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone, told Pistone that Galante kept the Zips close because they were as mean as he was, and that nobody could trust those bastard Zips except the old man. Bonanno soldier Anthony Murrah was more direct. The Zips are clannish and secretive, he said, and they're the meanest killers in the business. FBI agent Charles Rooney, who would later run the Pizza Connection investigation, he could describe the Zips looking like provincial gentlemen from another time, more at home strolling through a palazzo in Palermo than the avenues of Brooklyn. Men in fedora hats and capes who seemed dropped from another century into Reagan-era New York. They had no qualms about murders the American Mafia considered off-limits. Car bombs, standard practice in Sicily, anathema in New York. They killed enemies on their deathbeds, following the Sicilian tradition that a man marked for death cannot be permitted to die of natural causes. The contempt ran both directions. When Salvatore Catalano briefly became acting boss of the entire Bonanno family after Galante's murder, he stepped down after 1 week because he had difficulties communicating with the American members. He didn't need the title. He controlled the drug pipeline. That was the only source of power that mattered. The FBI would spend 4 years trying to understand what these men were saying to each other on wiretapped phone lines. They never fully succeeded. Galante's daughter Angela, speaking decades after his death, offered a window into the man behind the reputation. He saw drugs as his opportunity to almost take over the world, she said. What he did might be wrong, but he excelled at it. Galante ate alone most nights. Even his own family found his silences difficult to endure. He trusted almost no one born in America. The Zips were the exception, because the Zips were Sicilian. And Sicilian was the only language in which Galante felt he was speaking to equals. His fatal error was greed without diplomacy. He declared himself boss of bosses without commission authorization, seized heroin profits that should have been distributed to the other families, and ordered the murders of at least 8 Gambino family members to take over their drug operations in Brooklyn. He famously said that no one would ever kill him. They wouldn't dare. The commission dared. July 12, 1979. Approximately 2:45 in the afternoon. The temperature in Brooklyn hit 87 degrees. Carmine Galante sat at a wrought iron table on the back patio of Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant at 205 Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick. He was having lunch with his cousin Giuseppe Turano, who owned the restaurant, and with loyal capo Leonard Coppola. Turano was leaving for a vacation in Sicily. This was meant to be a goodbye meal: fish, salad, wine. After the main course, before dessert arrived, Galante lit one of his trademark De Nobili cigars. His two Sicilian bodyguards arrived after he was already seated. Cesare Bonventre, 28 years old, standing nearly 6'7", and Baldo Amato, 27. Despite the sweltering heat, both wore leather jackets. They ordered espresso and sat at a separate table. A blue Mercury stopped in front of the restaurant. Three men wearing ski masks emerged carrying a sawed-off double-barreled shotgun, a pump-action shotgun, and a handgun. They walked through the dining room, past the lunch crowd, past the waitstaff, past the bar, and out the back door to the patio. Giuseppe Turano stood and exclaimed, "Get out of here! What are you guys doing?" The answer came in gunfire. Galante took a shotgun blast to the upper chest and multiple rounds that pierced his left eye. He sustained more than 80 exit wounds. He died before his body came to rest in the small tomato garden beside his chair. Turano and Coppola were shot in the back of the head. John Turano, the owner's 17-year-old son, was also hit but survived. Bonventre and Amato were left completely unharmed. Court records from the Rico Commission trial later established that the two bodyguards had joined in shooting Coppola, Turano, and Galante. They disappeared from the scene immediately, surrendering to the Brooklyn DA's office nearly 3 weeks later. A New York Post photographer climbed to a fire escape behind the patio and captured the image that would become one of the most reproduced crime scene photographs in American history. Galante crumpled in the tomato patch, covered partially by a floral oilcloth, and his ever-present cigar still clenched between his teeth, one open eye staring at nothing. When the coroner's stretcher carried the body out of Joe and Mary's, it passed beneath a restaurant sign that read, "We give special attention to outgoing orders." The hit had been authorized by the commission. Genovese boss Frank Thierry initiated the conspiracy. Even retired Joseph Bonanno in Arizona gave his blessing. The imprisoned official Bonanno boss Philip Restelli formally requested permission through soldier Joseph Messina. The triggermen were Anthony Bruno Indelicato, the only person ever convicted of the murder, sentenced to 40 years at the commission trial, along with Dominic Trinchera, and, according to government informant Frank Lino's testimony, Russell Morrow. Approximately 30 minutes after the killing, FBI surveillance videotape captured Indelicato arriving at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, being congratulated by members of both the Bonanno and Gambino families. Bonventre was promoted to capo at age 28, the youngest in Bonanno family history. The investigation that followed would produce the longest federal criminal trial in American history, and 3 of the defendants wouldn't survive to hear the verdict. Bonventre and Amato sat at that table as the man's bodyguards. Within minutes, they were part of the team that killed him. Before I get into how the heroin operation actually worked at the mechanical level, I'd be curious what you think. Was this always the arrangement? Did Galante know what his men were capable of? Or did he believe his own line, that nobody would dare? I'd be curious where you land. Here's a number that explains everything about the pizza connection: $6,000. That's what a kilogram of morphine base cost when purchased from Turkish trafficker Yasar Avni Musululu through Swiss intermediaries in the late 1970s. On the streets of New York, that same kilogram, refined into heroin, cut and packaged for retail, sold for up to $1 million. FBI case agents documented that $17.5 million was paid to the Turkish supplier for approximately 3,900 pounds of morphine base over the course of the operation. The raw material moved by sea or overland from Turkey through Switzerland to Palermo. Refineries operated in and around the Sicilian capital, at Piranesi near the airport, at Trabia along the northern coast, and on Via Messina Marine in the city itself. The chemists were recycled talent from a previous era. When the French Connection collapsed in the early 1970s, the Sicilian Mafia hired the same Marseille-trained specialists to convert morphine base into high-purity heroin in their own labs. At a facility in Trabia, mafioso Gerlando Alberti was arrested alongside 3 French chemists working under his direction. The product that emerged tested at between 80 and 90% purity, far above the standard 40 to 50% grade on New York streets at the time. The finished heroin crossed the Atlantic inside legitimate pizza supply shipments. It was concealed within cans of San Marzano tomatoes, inside olive oil containers, packed alongside cheese shipments hidden in cans of tuna, gnawed and buried in crates of Sicilian oranges. Fordham University anthropologist Peter Schneider added a detail that rarely appears in mainstream accounts. Heroin was sometimes smuggled under the gowns of nuns traveling from Sicily to the United States to collect charitable donations for orphanages. Specially coded boxes from European suppliers would clear U.S. customs without secondary inspection. Smugglers on the American end watched for the shipments and retrieved the heroin at the destination pizzerias. The money moved in the opposite direction with equal precision. Drug cash was mixed with legitimate pizza revenue at the parlor registers. As organized crime expert Antonio Nicasso explained the mechanics, if you have 200 customers in a given day, a bookkeeper can punch the receipt so that it shows 500 customers. And the money you don't make from selling pizza, you put in the cash register from selling heroin. The blended cash, now indistinguishable from restaurant revenue, was deposited into commercial bank accounts, then moved offshore through multiple channels, brokerage accounts at E.F. Hutton and Merrill Lynch, cash-stuffed Samsonite suitcases handed directly to the Swissair station manager at JFK Airport for physical transport on scheduled flights, and electronic wire transfers directed to Swiss banks in the Ticino region near the Italian border. Between July and December of 1980 alone, FBI surveillance documented 1 metric ton of physical cash leaving the United States through these channels. Over the full 8-year operation, more than $60 million in used 5 and 10 neo-bound and $20 bills was smuggled or wired to Switzerland, Italy, and Turkey. Most people assumed the pizzerias were empty fronts, places that barely functioned as restaurants, with no real customers and no real business. That assumption is exactly wrong. The laundering worked precisely because the businesses were legitimate. Real customers walked in every day. Real pizza was made. Real tax returns were filed. The heroin money was invisible because it was buried inside the revenue stream of a functioning enterprise. Nobody looks twice at a busy pizza shop making bank deposits. The FBI's most celebrated mafia penetration proved the Zips' impenetrability by negative example. Joe Pistone spent 6 years inside the Bonanno family as Donnie Brasco. He got close enough to Lefty Ruggiero and Sonny Black Napolitano to record conversations on witness crimes and build cases that produced over 200 indictments across the American Mafia. The 1997 film shows his infiltration as comprehensive. He's in the social clubs, the back rooms, the planning meetings, the inner circle. What the film doesn't show is the crew Pistone couldn't touch. In his own accounts, Pistone described the Zips as the most dangerous men in the family, the ones even American-born members feared. It was Ruggiero who pointed Catalano out to Pistone during a chance encounter on a Brooklyn street and told him that Catalano had been granted the heroin concession for the entire United States. That single piece of intelligence leaked through an American-born member's resentment, not through any access Pistone had to the Sicilian faction, helped launch the FBI's Pizza Connection investigation. The film erased the Zips from the story entirely. The real story is that the Zips were the part of the Bonanno family that even Donnie Brasco couldn't reach. The barriers weren't circumstantial, they were structural and they were layered. The Zips didn't speak Italian, they spoke Sicilian dialect, a distinct linguistic system unintelligible to speakers of standard Italian, and they layered it with coded phrases and vocal inflections that functioned as a second encryption. As the FBI's own official case history states, turning the many covert conversations into plain English was especially challenging because the conspirators mostly spoke Sicilian and used coded phrases to conceal their true activities. After 30 days of Title III wiretap intercepts, agents made a disturbing discovery. The subjects used inflection itself as code to discuss criminal conduct. The literal words on a transcript meant nothing without understanding the tonal system underneath them. The Bureau had virtually no Sicilian-speaking agents. Case agents Rooney and Shaliro wrote bluntly that there was a clear lack of translators fluent in the Sicilian dialect. The FBI assembled translation support from desperate sources. A former housewife working in the closed files section who happened to speak several languages, a special clerk with some dialect knowledge, and one case agent named Carmine Russo, who was a native Sicilian speaker. The DEA and NYPD contributed additional personnel. Eventually, the FBI's legal attaché office in Rome obtained direct assistance from Italian law enforcement. Even with these resources, full and reliable translation was never achieved. Entire conversations remained partially decoded, their precise meaning argued over by translators with different regional knowledge. Beyond language, the Zips operated on village-based trust networks rooted in specific Sicilian towns. Everyone in the heroin operation knew each other from childhood, through blood ties, through marriage, through generational village connections stretching back decades. An outsider, even a Sicilian from the wrong town, let alone an Italian-American from Brooklyn, had zero chance of penetrating those bonds. The Zips congregated in insular cafes on Knickerbocker Avenue and along the Brooklyn-Queens border where only Sicilians were welcome. They maintained primary loyalty to their Sicilian bosses rather than the American family structure. They used payphones with rotating numbers, prearranged call times, and coded designations for every participant. Ronald Goldstock, director of the New York State Organized Crime Task Force, told Time that the Americanized families simply lacked the discipline and internal controls the Sicilians maintained. They'd grown comfortable, vulnerable, penetrable. The Zips had none of those weaknesses. Call it the dialect wall, not merely a cultural barrier, but a structural encryption system that rendered the FBI's entire investigative methodology obsolete. The Bureau's playbook was designed for English-speaking criminals who frequented public establishments and could be approached by outsiders offering money-making schemes. The Zips were none of those things. Because infiltration was impossible, the entire case had to be built from the outside. The Pizza Connection investigation required 93 separate Title III wiretap orders, a 660-page affidavit supporting them, and active cooperation from law enforcement agencies in 10 nations across 3 continents. The FBI spent 4 years listening to conversations they couldn't fully understand, in a language they couldn't reliably translate, using codes that operated on vocal inflection rather than vocabulary. I'd be curious where you land on this. Was the Zips' impenetrability a matter of old-world Sicilian discipline, or was it an institutional failure of American law enforcement to recognize that organized crime had already evolved past its tools? I'd be curious what you think. Cesare Bonventre called himself a pizza man from Brooklyn. He was suspected of over 20 murders, born January 1st, 1951, in Castellammare del Golfo, nephew of former Bonanno underboss John Bonventre, a distant cousin of Joseph Bonanno himself. He arrived in the United States around 1968 at 17. Nearly 6'7", lean and strikingly handsome, he embodied Italian couture on a Brooklyn salary. Aviator sunglasses, European leather man purses, shirts unbuttoned to display a gold crucifix against tan skin. Joseph Massino warned associates that Bonventre was a very sharp guy and that they had to be careful around him. His end came on April 16, 1984. Bonanno soldiers Salvatore, good-looking Sal Vitale, and Louis Haha Atanasio picked him up for a supposed meeting. Atanasio shot him twice in the head while they were still in the car. Bonventre didn't die. He grabbed the steering wheel, fought his way out of the vehicle, and crawled across the concrete before Atanasio finished him with 2 more shots at close range. His body was hacked in half with a hacksaw and stuffed into 2 55-gallon glue drums in a warehouse in Garfield, New Jersey. It took forensic technicians 3 months to identify the remains. He was 33 years old. Baldo Amato, born December 15, 1951, also from Castellammare, survived everything the life threw at him. New York Times reporter Ralph Blumenthal described him as looking like a fierce Alain Delon, darkly handsome, a wave of thick black hair, deep-set sparkling eyes, full, sensuous lips. He ran a deli on 2nd Avenue and 84th Street in Yorkville, Manhattan. He received only 5 years in the Pizza Connection trial after his lawyer successfully exploited procedural delays. He returned to the streets, rose through the ranks, and took over the Giannini crew in Queens. In 2006, he was convicted of 2 1992 murders, restaurant owner Sebastiano De Falco and New York Post Delivery Superintendent Robert Perino, and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated today at approximately 74 years old. Salvatore Catalano ran the machine. Born 1941 in Cimina, a dusty hilltop town in Palermo province, where his mother died when he was a child and his father drove a bus for a living. His brother Onofrio was boss of the local mafia clan, and Salvatore was allegedly inducted into Cosa Nostra before he ever left Sicily, arriving in America around 1957 at age 16. He barely spoke English even after decades in the country, a deliberate choice, not a limitation. English was the language of the people he didn't trust. He ran Catalano Brothers Bakery on Metropolitan Avenue in Middle Village, Queens, appearing to the neighborhood as a quiet, middle-aged baker who went home early. His real office was a phone booth down the street, where he spent hours making and receiving prearranged calls on a rotating schedule designed to defeat surveillance. He never used the bakery phone. He never discussed business inside any building he owned. After the Pizza Connection trial, he received 45 years and a $1.15 million fine. He served 29 years, never cooperating, never testifying, never speaking a word to authorities, and was deported to Cimina in 2016. Then there was Pietro Alfano, Gaetano Badalamenti's nephew, who operated Alfano's Pizza and Spaghetti restaurant in Oregon, Illinois, a town so small that his arrest produced genuine shock. Townspeople told reporters he made the best pizza in town. During summations on February 11, 1987, Alfano was shot 3 times while walking with his wife near a Greenwich Village cafe. Paralyzed from the waist down, he was convicted from a wheelchair and sentenced to 15 years, 17 months, 22 defendants, 300 government witnesses, and a judge who stopped riding the subway to the courthouse. The Pizza Connection trial, formerly United States versus Gaetano Badalamenti et al., opened on September 30, 1985, before Judge Pierre Laval in the Southern District of New York. The prosecution team included Richard Martin as lead assistant U.S. attorney and Louis Freeh, who would later become director of the FBI. Rudolph Giuliani, then U.S. attorney for the Southern District, oversaw the case. The trial cost an estimated $50 million and produced over 40,000 pages of transcript. Prosecutors introduced evidence from 55,000 wiretapped conversations. Freeh developed a novel courtroom technique. Unemployed actors were recruited to read the intercepted wiretap conversations aloud in the courtroom, dramatizing the coded Sicilian exchanges for an English-speaking jury that otherwise would have had no way to absorb them. The prosecution's star witness was Tommaso Buscetta, the first major Sicilian mafioso ever to break omertà and testify against his own organization. Extradited to the United States in December of 1984, he took the stand for 9 consecutive days. outlining the Sicilian Mafia's internal commission structure and identifying the defendants' specific roles within the heroin network. A second Sicilian cooperator, Salvatore Contorno, provided direct eyewitness evidence. He testified about a February 1980 meeting at a farmhouse in Bagheria, Sicily, where he personally witnessed Catalano, Mazzara, and others testing a shipment of 40.6 kilograms of heroin for purity. Neither Buscetta nor Contorno were members of the American Zip crew. They were Sicilian pentiti cooperating from abroad. The Zips themselves never broke. Not one of them cooperated. Violence shadowed the proceedings from the first week to the last. Gaetano Mazzara, a key heroin distributor whose palm print had been found on the wrapping of a kilogram package purchased in an undercover buy, disappeared on Thanksgiving Eve of 1986. His body was found 6 days later in a black plastic garbage bag lying in a gutter in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. 2 bullet holes in his head and multiple sharp wounds from a cleaver-type weapon. Judge Laval told the jury it was his sad duty to inform them that one of the defendants had died. Alfano was shot and paralyzed during summations. Giuseppe Ganci, Catalano's chief lieutenant, whose bail had been set at $7.5 million, died of lung cancer in the middle of trial. Across the Atlantic, Italian magistrate Nino Cassara, who had visited the FBI's wire room in New York and personally confirmed Gaetano Badalamenti's voice on intercepted calls, was assassinated in front of his home in Palermo in August of 1985, while the trial was still in its early months. Judge Laval received death threats and admitted he feared for his life. On March 2, 1987, the jury returned verdicts. 18 of 19 remaining defendants were convicted. Only Vito Badalamenti, Gaetano's son, was acquitted. Catalano received 45 years and a $1.15 million fine. Gaetano Badalamenti received 45 years, later capped at 30 under Spanish extradition terms. He died in a federal prison hospital in 2004 at age 80, never having set foot in Italy again. The man who made the convictions possible paid with his life on a Sicilian highway. Giovanni Falcone, the Italian magistrate who collaborated closely with the FBI throughout the Pizza Connection investigation, who shared intelligence and legal strategies across the Atlantic, who helped build the evidentiary framework that allowed American prosecutors to connect Sicilian clan structures to Brooklyn pizza parlors, was assassinated on May 23, 1992. A massive bomb containing nearly 400 kilograms of explosives was planted beneath the A29 motorway near the town of Capaci. It detonated as his motorcade passed, killing Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, herself a magistrate, and 3 police escorts. The blast left a crater in the highway that could be seen from the air. His colleague and friend Paolo Borsellino was murdered 57 days later by a car bomb in Via D'Amelio in Palermo. Borsellino had known he was next. He told friends he was working on borrowed time. Evidence from the Pizza Connection investigation was shared with Italian authorities and formed a critical component of the parallel Maxi trial in Palermo, where 338 of 475 defendants were convicted, the largest mass mafia prosecution in Italian history. The cost of breaking the Zips' silence wasn't measured in dollars or in years of trial testimony. It was measured in magistrates buried in Sicilian soil. The structural contrast tells the final story with a clarity that no narrative could match. The 5 families of New York each maintained between 100 and 250 made members. The Zips operated with roughly 24. Those 24 men, drawn from a handful of Sicilian hilltop villages where everyone shared blood, marriage, or childhood, generated more drug revenue than any single American family produced from all its rackets combined. Gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, construction fraud, garment district trucking, all of it together didn't approach what the Zips pulled through their pizza parlors. FBI case agents Rooney and Shaliro estimated the retail value of the heroin at $4.8 billion. nearly 3 times the commonly cited 1.65 billion prosecution figure, which likely represents wholesale or mid-level value. The numbers explain why the American Mafia tolerated the Zips despite despising them, and why the commission authorized Galante's murder but left the heroin pipeline intact. The machine was too profitable to destroy. They just needed someone more manageable to run it. If understanding how 24 men from a handful of Sicilian villages ran a billion-dollar heroin pipeline through American pizza parlors, and why the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world couldn't penetrate it for a decade, is the kind of thing you came here for, a like tells me to keep going deeper. Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick, Brooklyn was the Zips' territorial base, the Bonanno family's ancestral stronghold for over 50 years. By the mid-1950s, the surrounding blocks were one of New York's largest Italian-American enclaves, populated predominantly by families from Palermo, Trapani, and Agrigento provinces. The avenue was lined with social clubs and cafes that doubled as operational headquarters. Café del Viale, where high-stakes baccarat games ran in the back rooms, and Catalano's brothers operated Colosseo imports across the street. Café dello Sport, Café Bella Palermo. When old-school capo Pietro Licata, who ran the avenue and openly opposed drug dealing on his turf, was shot dead near his home in Flushing, Queens on November 4, 1976, Catalano took over as crew chief within 3 days. Bonventre was rumored to be the shooter. The Zips had seized complete control of the most important block in the Bonanno Empire. Today, Knickerbocker Avenue is unrecognizable. Bushwick is one of Brooklyn's most gentrified neighborhoods. Maria Hernandez Park, formerly Knickerbocker Park, renamed in 1989 after a local anti-drug activist murdered by dealers, hosts farmers markets and weekend dog runs. The Bushwick Collective, founded in 2011, has transformed industrial building facades into an outdoor gallery of street art that draws tourists from around the world. Craft cocktail bars and boutique pet shops line the blocks where Sicilian cafes once served espresso to men who moved heroin by the metric ton. 205 Knickerbocker Avenue, where Galante died with a cigar in his teeth on that 87-degree afternoon, remains a shuttered, empty retail unit, boarded up for years, its storefront blank between businesses that have no idea what happened there. And in November of 2024, in the hilltop town of Cimina, Sicily, the same village where he was born, the same village where his brother ran the local clan, the same village he returned to after 29 years in American federal prison, Italian police arrested an 83-year-old man on extortion charges. He had been shaking down a local businessman for €500 per month, payable for life. His name was Salvatore Catalano, the man who once commanded a pipeline worth billions back in the village where he started, squeezing a shopkeeper for the price of a restaurant meal. Same silence, same village, same work, just smaller.